Charlotte Ashworth was told her entire life she was too dark, too serious, too much of everything the world didn't want. They called her peculiar, morbid, invisible. But the Duke of Thornton saw something different in her shadowed sketches. He saw the truth everyone else was too afraid to acknowledge. What began as a scandal at a London ball in 1897 became something neither expected, a love that refused to perform, that chose honesty over elegance, depth over dazzle. This is the story of two people who'd learned to hide their hearts, and what happened when they finally stopped pretending. The whispers had followed Charlotte Ashworth since childhood, like a persistent shadow, too serious, too plain, too peculiar. In the glittering ballrooms of London in 1897, where beauty and vivacity were currency, she had learned to make herself invisible. Yet invisibility, she discovered, could be both shield and prison. The Weatherby Estate's drawing room vibrated with the season's relentless energy. 300 guests pressed into gilded excess, their voices rising like steam from overheated bodies corseted too tightly. Charlotte stood near the marble mantelpiece, her fingers tracing the cool stone, anchoring herself against the overwhelming sensory assault. The air was thick with perfume, candle wax, and the metallic tang of champagne. "We simply must have entertainment," Lady Weatherby declared, her voice cutting through the cacophony with practiced authority. Her gaze swept the room like a lighthouse beam, searching for victims. "Lady Victoria, perhaps you'll favor us with your delightful rendering of that French chanson." Charlotte's elder sister, Victoria, glided forward, resplendent in emerald silk that made her auburn hair glow like burnished copper. Victoria possessed the kind of beauty that stopped conversations, all curves and confidence, with a laugh that made men lean closer and women assess their own inadequacies. She was 28 now, reaching the dangerous edge of spinsterhood despite her advantages, and the desperation had begun to show in the brittle brightness of her smile. "Oh, Lady Weatherby, I couldn't possibly," Victoria demurred, though her eyes had already found their target, the brooding figure of Duke Alfred Thornton standing near the French doors, all sharp angles and aristocratic disdain. "I've been practicing archery all week and my hands are simply exhausted." But Victoria's smile shifted, acquiring the particular quality of a cat cornering a mouse. She turned toward Charlotte with theatrical concern. "Charlotte sketches, don't you, darling? Perhaps she could provide us with a quick portrait. Though I must warn everyone, she has rather a morbid sensibility, all shadows and sadness. It's enough to dampen even the brightest spirits." The polite laughter rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Charlotte felt the familiar heat of humiliation crawl up her neck. It was an old wound, this particular cruelty. Her father had said much the same before his death. "Why must you draw such gloomy things? It's as if you're determined to remind us all of our mortality." Charlotte's art was not performance. It was language, the only one in which she could articulate the truths that lodged in her throat, unspoken. To have it mocked was to have her very voice ridiculed. "Come now, Miss Ashworth," Lady Weatherby insisted, though the warmth had drained from her tone. "Surely you can manage something cheerful for us." Charlotte moved forward because fleeing would create a greater spectacle. Her hands trembled as she accepted the sketching materials a servant produced, good quality paper and charcoal at least. She could dash off something conventional, something that would make Victoria nod approvingly, and the guests return to their gossip. But as she looked at the sea of powdered faces, jewels glittering at throats like beautiful manacles, something crystallized in her chest. A small, fierce ember of defiance. If they were going to dismiss her anyway, she would not give them prettiness. She began to sketch the room itself, not the polished surface they presented, but what she saw beneath, the exhaustion in Lady Weatherby's eyes despite her bright smile. The way young Lord Ashford's hand trembled around his glass, betraying his nervousness. The hollow quality of laughter that never reached anyone's eyes. She drew the weight of expectation, the suffocating pressure of maintaining appearances. The room did not go quiet. The conversation continued, a wall of noise that confirmed their indifference. But Charlotte closed her eyes briefly, then opened them to a narrowed focus, building her own world within the chaos, a sanctuary of honest observation. When she finished, she held up the sketch. There was a moment of confused silence as they tried to understand what they were seeing. It wasn't a flattering portrait or a cheerful scene. It was truth, rendered in charcoal and shadow. "Oh dear," Victoria's voice sliced through the uncertainty. "I did warn you all. Quite depressing, isn't it? One feels the need for another glass of champagne just to recover from such bleakness." Charlotte stood, her legs unsteady. She offered a brief curtsy and walked directly toward the terrace doors, not toward her sister but toward escape. She needed air that wasn't saturated with judgment. She needed darkness, where no one could see the tears threatening to spill. The terrace was a mercy of stone and starlight, the party's noise muffled here, becoming something bearable. Charlotte gripped the balustrade, the rough texture grounding her shaking hands. She had exposed something true, and they had laughed. "Do not listen to them, Miss Ashworth." Charlotte spun around, her heart lurching. Emerging from the shadows near a potted fern was an elderly gentleman with silver hair and eyes that held unexpected kindness. Maestro Giovanni Moretti, the celebrated conductor who'd been the evening's honored guest. "Maestro," she breathed, pressing a hand to her racing heart. "I didn't realize anyone was out here." "I came for the same reason you did," he said, his Italian accent making the words musical. "To escape those who have eyes but do not see. They are blind to the anima, the soul." Charlotte looked down at her charcoal-stained fingers. "My sister says I'm too dark, that I see sadness where there should be joy, and joy where there should be sadness." Moretti moved closer, his gaze intense. "You have a gift, Miss Ashworth. Most artists show only surfaces. You show what lives beneath. That is where truth resides. Do not let them shame you for speaking truth." It was a small thing, a few sentences from a stranger, but it felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning. Charlotte straightened slightly. "Thank you, Maestro. I often feel I'm speaking a language no one understands." "Not no one," he said gently. "Never no one. But you must be brave enough to speak it, even when they demand silence." He bowed over her hand with old-world elegance and slipped back inside, leaving her alone with the stars and the lingering warmth of his validation. Charlotte stared at the closed doors. She would have to return. Her mother would be searching, and Victoria would be waiting to see if her barb had struck home. She smoothed her pale grey skirts, brave enough to speak it. She would go back, but she would not apologize. Inside the ballroom, Alfred Thornton, Duke of Thornton, stood in a corner that provided surveillance of the entire room while maintaining strategic distance. He was a man built of restraint and silence. Society called him the Iron Duke, a title he neither encouraged nor discouraged. It served its purpose, keeping the ambitious mothers at bay. But tonight, his carefully maintained indifference had cracked. He had been watching when the younger Miss Ashworth sat down with that sketchpad. He had seen the terror in her posture, the way she seemed to brace for a blow. He had expected tears or perhaps angry abandonment of the task. Instead, she had created something that reached past his defenses and touched the carefully guarded grief he carried. The sketch spoke of loss without self-pity, acknowledged the masks everyone wore, the performance of happiness that exhausted them all. Alfred had lost his younger brother Edward 3 years ago, a riding accident that should have been preventable. He had refused to mourn publicly, burying the pain under layers of ducal responsibility and emotional lockdown. And then this woman, this overlooked shadow of a person, had somehow rendered his private anguish visible with nothing but charcoal and paper. He watched the terrace doors. He had seen her flee. He had seen the Italian maestro follow and return alone. Alfred waited. He was a patient man, a hunter of precise moments. When the door opened and Charlotte re-entered, he straightened. She looked different now, still fragile, but her chin was lifted. She didn't hug the walls this time. He moved. Charlotte moved through the ballroom with newfound purpose, heading toward a quiet alcove near the library entrance, where she might observe without participating. The maestro's words had given her something she hadn't possessed an hour ago, permission to exist as she was. She settled onto a velvet settee, hoping to remain undisturbed for the remainder of the evening. Her mother would find her eventually, but for now, she could simply breathe. The acoustics in this room are criminal. The voice was low, a baritone that seemed to reverberate through the floorboards. Charlotte startled, her fan slipping from her fingers and clattering to the polished floor. She looked up and felt the air leave her lungs. Alfred Thornton stood before her, impossibly tall and broad-shouldered, his face all aristocratic planes and sharp edges. The Iron Duke himself, regarding her with an intensity that made her skin prickle with awareness. "Your Grace," she managed, scrambling to stand. "I didn't see you." He bent smoothly, retrieving her fan. When she reached for it, he held it a moment longer than necessary, forcing her to meet his eyes. They were grey, like storm clouds, and utterly focused on her. "Please sit, Miss Ashworth. I have no desire to cause a scene." She sank back onto the settee, wary. Men like him didn't speak to women like her. "How do you know my name?" "I make it a point to know the names of the few people in London who possess actual depth," he said, positioning himself near the arm of her settee, effectively blocking her from the view of the rest of the room. "Your sketch was remarkable." Charlotte flinched reflexively. "You're kind to say so, Your Grace, but we both know I dampened the mood considerably." "Your sister," Alfred said, his tone flattening to absolute zero, "mistakes superficiality for substance." "They are not the same." Charlotte stared at him, really looked at him for the first time. He was intimidating, certainly. Power radiated from him like heat from a forge. But in his eyes, she recognized something familiar, the same dark echo she had tried to capture in her sketch. "I drew what I felt," she admitted, the words escaping before her internal censor could stop them. "It's the only way I know how to see the world." "It was honest," Alfred said. "Honesty is a dangerous thing in a ballroom, Miss Ashworth. It makes people uncomfortable because it reminds them how much they're pretending." A current of understanding passed between them, silent and electric. For a moment, the party noise faded completely, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of shared perception. He wasn't looking at her like a duke looking at a wallflower. He was looking at her like a man who had finally found someone who spoke his language. "There you are." The bubble shattered. Victoria swept into the alcove, her fan fluttering with agitation. She assessed the scene in an instant, Charlotte and the Duke alone in conversation, and her eyes narrowed with calculated alarm. "Your Grace," Victoria purred, dropping a curtsy that managed to be both proper and inviting. "I must apologize for my sister. I see she has cornered you with her melancholy." "Charlotte, really? You mustn't bore the Duke with your peculiarities. He is a man of standing. He requires brightness, not shadows." She turned her most dazzling smile on Alfred, positioning herself between them with practiced efficiency. "They're starting a waltz. I would be honored to rescue you from this gloomy corner." Charlotte felt the familiar shame rising, hot and choking. She prepared to retreat, to fade, to let Victoria win because Victoria always won. She began to stand. "Stay." It was not a request. It was a command, soft but immovable as iron. Victoria blinked, her smile faltering. "I beg your pardon." Alfred didn't look at Victoria. He kept his gaze locked on Charlotte, his grey eyes holding hers, anchoring her to the spot with sheer force of will. "I am not in need of rescue, Lady Victoria," he said quietly. "And I am certainly not bored." He turned slowly to face the elder sister, his expression polite but devastatingly cold. "Your sister has just provided the only moment of genuine observation this evening has produced. I'm inquiring about her artistic technique, unless you have insights into portraiture you wish to share." Victoria's mouth opened and closed. She had no insights into art theory. She had insights into fashion and matrimonial strategy, but nothing that would serve her now. The fear flashed across her face, the terror of being intellectually outmatched, of being suddenly irrelevant. She let out a sharp, breathless laugh. "Well, you are certainly unique in your tastes, Your Grace. I shall leave you to your study." She spun on her heel and swept away, her spine rigid with humiliation. Charlotte stared at the Duke, stunned. Her heart hammered against her ribs like something caged and desperate. No one had ever done that. No one had ever chosen her over Victoria. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "She'll make me pay for it later." "Let her try," Alfred said. The protectiveness in his voice was sudden and fierce, startling them both. He took a half step closer, lowering his voice so the surrounding crowd became nothing but distant murmur. "The world is too loud, Miss Ashworth. It's full of people who perform rather than feel." He looked down at her hands, still stained with charcoal. The hands that had captured something he'd been unable to articulate about his own grief. He wanted to take them in his own, but the rules of the room forbade it. Instead, he leaned in, his voice dropping to a register that felt like a secret. "Draw it again." Charlotte looked up, breathless. "Your Grace." "Not now, not here," he murmured, his eyes dark with something she couldn't name. "But find a way. Show me what you see when they're not watching. I find I have a great need to see the truth again." He didn't wait for an answer. He bowed, sharp, formal, and stepped back into the shadows, leaving her sitting on the velvet settee with her heart racing and the terrified, exhilarating realization that for the first time in her life, she had not been invisible. She had been seen, and the man who saw her was dangerous in ways she was only beginning to understand. The morning light in the Ashworth breakfast room was unforgiving. Fed poured through east-facing windows, illuminating every particle of dust and the rigid tension in Victoria's shoulders as she viciously buttered toast. The only sound was the scrape of silver against china, a harsh, rhythmic abrasion. Charlotte sat opposite, nursing lukewarm tea, her gaze fixed on the floral tablecloth. The memory of the Duke's voice, "Draw it again," hummed just beneath her skin, a secret warmth that both thrilled and terrified her. "I still cannot fathom it," Victoria snapped, abandoning the toast to glare at her sister. "The Duke of Thornton conversing with you in an alcove like some sort of clandestine arrangement. You sitting there looking like a frightened rabbit. It was humiliating." "He was merely being polite about my sketch," Charlotte said quietly, though her pulse quickened at the lie. "Polite?" Victoria's laugh was brittle. "Alfred Thornton is never merely polite. He is calculating, impossibly selective, and entirely too discerning to be interested in morbid sketches." Victoria picked up her hand mirror, examining her reflection with the anxiety of someone watching their power slip away. "I saw Lady Barrington taking note. If people think I'm losing my influence, if they think the Ashworth sisters are becoming tedious." She let the sentence hang, the fear of social irrelevance naked in her eyes before the armor snapped back into place. "You must not encourage him, Charlotte. He will toy with you and discard you without a second thought. You're too fragile for a man like that." Charlotte set her cup down with a soft clink. A new sensation was taking root in her chest, resentment, sharp and unfamiliar. "Perhaps I'm stronger than you think." Victoria stared at her. "Darling, you hide in corners. Leave the Duke to those who know how to handle power." A footman entered, bearing a silver salver with a single cream envelope. He presented it to Charlotte. Victoria froze, recognizing the ducal crest in the wax seal. Charlotte took it with trembling fingers and broke the seal under Victoria's intense scrutiny. It was not a love letter. It was far more dangerous. An invitation to view the private collection of rare manuscripts at Thornton House the following afternoon. A formal invitation extended to Mrs. Ashworth and her daughters. But the handwritten postscript was singular. "I await the truth you promised." The Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew were suffocatingly humid. The glass structure of the palm house trapped moisture like a terrarium, creating an atmosphere so thick Charlotte could barely draw breath. It smelled intensely of wet earth, crushing greenery, and the cloying sweetness of orchids past their prime. Charlotte had separated herself from her mother and Victoria, who were complaining about the oppressive heat near the entrance. She needed space, even if the air felt like warm soup in her lungs. She walked deeper into the artificial jungle, enormous palm fronds arching overhead like the ribcage of some prehistoric beast. The iron walkways rang softly under her boots. "You look as though you're debating whether to faint or flee." The deep voice emerged from dense foliage to her left. Alfred stepped onto the path, looking incongruously formal in his dark morning coat amid the riotous tropical greenery. He appeared completely unaffected by the heat, as if nothing could penetrate his composure. Charlotte stopped, her heart performing now familiar acrobatics. "Your Grace, you seem to have a talent for appearing in unexpected places." "I have a talent for seeking quiet spaces," he said, moving closer. "You happen to occupy them." The sheer physical presence of him seemed to consume what little space existed on the narrow path. The heat intensified, or perhaps that was merely her awareness of him sharpening. "You received my note," he said. It wasn't a question. "I did. It's unusual to invite an entire family to view manuscripts. Necessary protocol to ensure your presence." He stopped a foot from her, close enough that she could see the fine lines of tension around his usually impassive eyes. "Did you bring it?" She knew what he meant. Her hand moved involuntarily to the small reticule at her wrist. Inside was a folded leather portfolio containing her most private sketches, dark, complex images she never dared show in public. "I did," she whispered. "But I don't understand why." Alfred's gaze dropped to her mouth for a fraction of a second, before returning to her eyes. "The other night you woke something I'd put to sleep. A silence I'd cultivated for 3 years was broken." He turned slightly, appearing to study an enormous fern. "My brother Edward. He loved color, chaos, life. He used to paint these absolutely terrible watercolors at all hours, singing off-key." Charlotte remained very still. The gossip sheet said the Iron Duke never spoke of the brother who'd died. "The silence must be very loud now," she said softly. He looked back at her sharply. "It's deafening. Until you drew that sketch. You didn't try to fill the silence with false brightness as everyone else does. You acknowledged it." He took a step closer, invading propriety's boundaries. The humid air pressed around them like a living thing. "I need to see your work again, Charlotte. Not in a ballroom where everyone's watching. Real work, in a place meant for truth." The use of her Christian name was a shock, a breach of etiquette so profound, it felt like a physical touch. Her breath caught. "Yes," she said, the word barely more than an exhale. 2 days later, the Ashworth women arrived at Thornton House. It was a massive structure of grey stone that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The entrance hall alone was larger than their entire London townhouse. Mrs. Ashworth went silent with intimidation. Victoria immediately began assessing the value of everything in sight, her eyes calculating. Alfred met them in the hall, his demeanor perfectly correct. Yet his eyes sought Charlotte's immediately, a private acknowledgement that sent heat flooding through her. He led them through a portrait gallery of grim-faced ancestors before depositing Mrs. Ashworth and a sullen Victoria in the blue drawing room with tea and an elderly aunt he'd procured specifically for distraction. Miss Ashworth expressed interest in the illuminated manuscripts in the library, Alfred said smoothly to Mrs. Ashworth. "If you'll permit me to show her the collection. Some are quite fragile and require careful handling." Before her mother could object, and before Victoria could do more than narrow her eyes in suspicion, Alfred had ushered Charlotte out and down a long, quiet corridor. The library was a sanctuary. 2 stories tall, lined floor to ceiling with leather-bound volumes, it possessed acoustics that made every sound feel sacred. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows overlooking a private garden, but the defining characteristic was its absolute stillness. Awaiting silence, heavy with expectation, Alfred closed the heavy oak door, the latch clicking shut echoed like a gunshot in the quiet. "This was Edward's room," he said, walking to a large mahogany desk near the windows. "No one has worked in here since he died." Charlotte stopped in the center of the room, overwhelmed. He was letting her into his grief, into the private spaces where he kept his dead. "Your Grace, I'm not worthy of this. Let me be the judge of that." He turned to face her, the stoic mask gone, replaced by raw intensity that made her knees weak. "Sit down, Charlotte. Show me what you see." She moved to the desk like someone in a dream. Her hands shook so violently, she feared she wouldn't be able to hold charcoal steady. She reached into her reticule and withdrew the leather portfolio, placing it on the polished surface. Alfred moved to stand just behind her right shoulder. She could feel the heat radiating from him, smell sandalwood and something uniquely him. "May I?" His voice was rough. She nodded, unable to speak. He opened the portfolio carefully, reverently. The first sketch showed a woman's hands, elderly and work-worn, clutching a letter. The second showed a child's abandoned toy in shadow. The third showed a man's back as he walked away down a long hallway, the perspective making him seem to recede into darkness. Every image spoke of loss, of absence, of the spaces left behind when people disappeared from our lives. Alfred stood motionless, studying each one with an intensity that bordered on desperate. His breathing had changed, becoming deeper, more deliberate. "These are extraordinary," he finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You see it, the weight of absence. Most people don't understand that grief isn't about sadness. It's about the sudden, terrible silence where someone used to be." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "No one has ever understood that before." "Show me more," he demanded, his hand coming to rest on the back of her chair. "Don't hide from me, Charlotte. I've lived in hiding for 3 years. I recognize it." She pulled out her current work, a half-finished sketch of an empty chair at a dining table, morning light streaming across it, a place setting still arranged as if waiting for someone who would never return. Alfred made a sound, low in his throat, almost like pain. His hand moved from the chair to her shoulder, warm and solid and real. "This," he said roughly, "this is what I've been unable to say. The empty chair at breakfast, the habit of turning to share a thought with someone who isn't there anymore." Charlotte looked up at him, tears now flowing freely. "I drew this after my father died. Everyone said I should put it away, that it was morbid. But I needed to make the absence visible," Alfred finished. "To prove he existed by showing the space he left behind." He gripped her shoulder tighter. "You are remarkable, Charlotte Ashworth. Don't let them convince you otherwise." The air between them crackled with something electric. He was going to kiss her. She saw the intent in his eyes, the way he leaned closer. She tilted her face up, desperate for it, for him, for this connection that felt like finally being understood. The door burst open. "Well," Victoria's voice was ice water, shattering everything. "Mother fell asleep and I got concerned about propriety." She stood in the doorway, taking in the scene, his hand on Charlotte's shoulder, their proximity, the intimate papers spread between them. Triumph flashed across her face, quickly masked by false concern. "Charlotte, darling, you look feverish. We must leave immediately." Victoria crossed the room, physically inserting herself between them. She looked at Alfred with a smile sharp as broken glass. "Thank you for your hospitality, Your Grace. I believe my sister has seen quite enough." Alfred straightened, his face hardening into stone, but his eyes remained locked on Charlotte, burning with frustrated fury. "Lady Victoria, your timing is impeccable as always." "I do try," Victoria said sweetly. She grabbed Charlotte's arm, her grip painful. "Come along before you embarrass yourself further." As Victoria dragged her from the room, Charlotte looked back. Alfred stood by the desk alone again with his brother's ghost, and her sketches spread before him like evidence of a crime. He looked like a man watching his only lifeline being severed, and Charlotte realized with devastating clarity that she was falling in love with the Iron Duke, and her sister would burn the world down before allowing it. The annual Salisbury Ball was the assault on the senses. The noise was immense, a cacophony of string orchestra, hundreds of voices competing to be heard, the rustle of silk and satin creating its own percussion. Charlotte felt nauseous. The memory of Alfred's hand on her shoulder, of the near kiss interrupted, had replayed endlessly in her mind. A torment of what might have been. Victoria had been relentless since leaving Thornton House. "He's toying with you. He'll ruin your reputation and then marry some titled heiress and we'll be laughingstocks. Do you want Mother to die of shame? Do you want to destroy what little standing we have left?" Charlotte stood near the open terrace doors, letting cold October air bite her skin. She wore pale grey again, the colour of fog, of things half seen. She felt herself disappearing into it. "You look like someone preparing for execution." Alfred materialized beside her, emerging from the crowd as if summoned by her thoughts. He looked furious and devastatingly handsome in black evening dress. He didn't bow. He simply stood next to her, radiating tension like heat. "Please, Your Grace," Charlotte whispered, glancing around nervously. "Victoria is watching. Let her watch. Let them all watch." His voice was low, urgent. "I cannot stop thinking about the library, about your sketches, about you." "It was a mistake," she said, repeating Victoria's words, trying to believe them. "We got carried away by shared grief. It doesn't mean it was the only real thing that has happened to me in 3 years, he interrupted roughly. He shifted to face her, using his body to shield her from the ballroom's view. Charlotte, I don't want this to end. I want to see your work again. I want to know what you're thinking when you go so quiet. I want... Oh, there you are, Charlotte. Victoria's voice cut through the moment like a blade. She rushed toward them, clutching her reticule, her face pale beneath carefully applied rouge. Her eyes were wild with something that looked genuinely like panic. Oh God, Charlotte, you must come. It's Mother. She grabbed Charlotte's arm with shaking hands. She's had a spell, her heart. The physician has been summoned. Charlotte's blood turned to ice. Mother? She heard rumors about you, about the library yesterday. Victoria's voice cracked. She collapsed in the card room. We must leave immediately. Charlotte looked from her sister's terrified face to Alfred. He appeared skeptical, his jaw clenched hard. Victoria, if this is manipulation, he warned. A game? Victoria's voice rose to a near shriek, tears spilling down her cheeks. My mother might be dying and you accuse me of games? For the first time, Charlotte saw genuine, unfiltered terror in her sister. Victoria's hands were shaking. Her breath came in gasps. This wasn't performance, this was real fear. Charlotte made her choice, the only choice she could make. Duty weighed heavier than desire. I have to go, she whispered to Alfred, stepping away from his warmth. The loss of it was immediate and agonizing. Charlotte, wait. Alfred reached for her hand. She pulled back, gathering her skirts. I cannot. Please don't follow us. She turned and fled after Victoria, away from the music, away from the man who had finally seen her true self, plunging back into the silence and shadows she knew best. The night air was cold against her flushed cheeks as their carriage rattled through London streets. Victoria sat across from her, crying into a handkerchief, and Charlotte held her own fear like broken glass in her chest. The following morning, brilliant sunshine flooded the Ashworth breakfast room with aggressive cheerfulness that felt like mockery. The air smelled of beeswax polish and Darjeeling tea, domestic tranquility that contradicted last night's crisis. Charlotte stood by the sideboard, gripping its edge until her knuckles whitened. In the center of the room, Mrs. Ashworth sat upright in her usual chair, looking not like a woman who'd nearly died, but like a woman enjoying buttered scones. It was merely heart palpitations, Charlotte, Mrs. Ashworth said, dabbing her mouth with a linen napkin. The heat in that card room was oppressive, and the shock of Lady Pemberton's gossip, naturally. But Dr. Henderson assures me my heart is quite strong, just a touch of anxiety. Charlotte slowly lifted her gaze to Victoria, who stood by the window, studiously examining the garden. The betrayal was a cold blade twisting in Charlotte's gut. There had been no heart attack, no imminent death. Only Victoria, terrified of losing control, pulling the one lever she knew would work, Charlotte's guilt. You knew, Charlotte said, her voice shaking, not with fear, but with unfamiliar rage. You knew she wasn't dying. You dragged me away from him because you couldn't bear it. Victoria turned, her silhouette stark against morning light. Her face was pale, stripped of its usual polished armor. I saved you, she hissed. Do you truly believe he cares for you? He's a duke, Charlotte. You were a curiosity, a melancholy novelty he could examine. Once he tired of your darkness, he would have discarded you without a second thought. You don't know him, Charlotte countered, stepping forward. And you don't know me. I know that I am 28 years old. Victoria's voice cracked, revealing the fracture beneath the porcelain. She moved toward Charlotte, her hands balling into fists. I know that if you, plain, peculiar, strange Charlotte, marry a duke, I become nothing. I become the spinster sister living on your charity, pitied by everyone. She took another step closer, tears now streaming openly. I have worked for years to be perfect, to be what they want, to smile and charm and perform, and you sit in a corner with your sketches and capture the attention of the most eligible man in England without even trying. The confession hung between them, raw and ugly. Charlotte looked at her sister and saw not a monster but a terrified woman clinging to crumbling relevance. Victoria's cruelty wasn't born of power, it was born of desperate fear of invisibility. "He wasn't a prize to be won, Victoria," Charlotte said softly, her anger cooling into diamond-hard resolve. "He was the first person who truly saw me, and you stole that chance from me." She walked to the door, pausing with her hand on the brass handle. "We're attending the opera tonight." Mrs. Ashworth blinked. "The opera? But darling, after last night's scare—" "We are going," Charlotte interrupted, her voice ringing with new authority. "Maestro Moretti is conducting Tristan and Isolde. We will attend, and we will hold our heads high, and we will show London that the Ashworth women do not hide in shadows." She looked directly at Victoria. "You may come or you may stay here and fade into the irrelevance you fear so desperately. The choice is yours." Victoria stared at her younger sister, as if seeing a stranger. Charlotte walked out, leaving them both speechless in the morning sunlight. For the first time in her life, she had chosen herself, and it was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. She had no idea if Alfred would even want to see her after last night's abandonment. But she was done being invisible. If she was going to lose him, it would be on her terms, not Victoria's. The opera house awaited, and with it, her reckoning. The Royal Opera House at Covent Garden was a cathedral of gilt and crimson velvet, humming with the anticipatory murmur of 2,000 souls. The air was thick with perfume, candle wax, and the particular electricity that preceded great performances. Charlotte sat in the front row of their modest box, spine straight, chin lifted. She wore deep midnight blue, no pastels, no virginal white. She looked like the night sky, or perhaps a bruise, a visible mark of something beautiful and painful. Victoria sat beside her, silent and rigid, her fan moving in jerky, anxious rhythms. The truce between them was fragile as spun sugar. Mrs. Ashworth fussed with her opera glasses, oblivious to the tension crackling between her daughters. The orchestra began tuning, a chaotic swell of strings and brass seeking harmony. Charlotte closed her eyes briefly, letting the discordant sound wash over her. Music, at least, was honest about its disorder before finding beauty. Focus on the music, she told herself. Just the music. The heavy velvet curtains began to part, house lights dimming, but before the conductor's baton could fall, their box door opened. The click of the latch was audible in the hushed anticipation. Charlotte turned. Alfred stood in the small shadowed entrance of their box. He looked enormous in evening dress, all dark severity and controlled power. He didn't glance at Mrs. Ashworth. He didn't acknowledge Victoria. His storm-grey eyes locked onto Charlotte with the force of a physical impact. "Your Grace," Mrs. Ashworth squeaked, nearly dropping her opera glasses. "Mrs. Ashworth," Alfred said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor. "I believe there has been a mistake with the seating arrangements." Victoria's fan stopped mid-flutter. She looked between the Duke and Charlotte, fear naked in her eyes, the terror of displacement made real. "A mistake," she whispered. "Indeed." Alfred stepped fully into the box. Eyes from surrounding boxes were beginning to turn toward them, sensing drama more compelling than any staged opera. He didn't care. "I find I cannot enjoy the music from my own box. It's too empty, too silent." He held out his hand. Not a polite social gesture, but an open palm, a lifeline, a demand. "Miss Ashworth," he said, deliberately omitting her title, ignoring the mother, ignoring propriety, ignoring the world. "Will you sit with me?" The subtext roared louder than any orchestra. "Come with me, leave the fear, choose this, choose me." Charlotte looked at Victoria. For a heartbeat, the old dynamic held, her sister's glare commanding her to be small, to submit, to disappear. But then Victoria's gaze dropped, a slight, almost imperceptible nod. Surrender, concession, perhaps even release. Charlotte stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but her spirit soared. She placed her hand in Alfred's. His fingers closed around hers, warm and solid and real. An anchor in every storm she'd ever weathered. "I would be honored, Your Grace," she said clearly. He didn't release her hand as he led her from the cramped box, past the stunned usher, down the corridor toward the Duke's private box. It was perhaps 50 yards, but it felt like crossing continents. like leaving one life and walking deliberately into another. The Duke's box was vast, positioned perfectly for both stage and acoustics, shrouded in shadows that offered privacy. He dismissed his attendant with a sharp gesture. They were alone. Below them, the music began. The prelude to Tristan und Isolde rose from the orchestra pit, a slow, aching crescendo of longing and unresolved tension. It mirrored the air in the box with painful accuracy. Alfred didn't sit. He stood behind Charlotte's chair, his presence a wall of warmth against her back. "Is your mother recovered?" he asked, voice rough. "She was never ill," Charlotte admitted, the truth tumbling out. "It was a lie designed to separate us." "I know." His hands gripped the back of her chair. "I knew the moment you left, but I needed to know if you would return." He moved around the chair and lowered himself into the seat beside hers, pulling it scandalously close. Their knees nearly touched in the darkness. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small folded object, placing it on the velvet railing between them. It was her sketch, the empty chair at the breakfast table, the one she'd shown him in the library. "I kept this," he said, looking at the stage where singers were taking their positions. "I've carried it with me since that afternoon." Charlotte reached for it with trembling fingers. Tucked behind it was another paper, a rough sketch in his own hand, crude but earnest. A window with light streaming through, illuminating an empty room. "You drew this?" she whispered. "I tried," he said, finally looking at her. In the dim light reflecting from the stage, his face was open, unguarded. The Iron Duke was gone. The man remained. "It's the light that came back when you showed me your work, the silence you broke." Tears blurred her vision. "You drew for me. I want you to teach me," he said intensely. He took her hand again, pressing it against his chest. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and strong through the starch of his shirt. "My house is too quiet, Charlotte. My life is too quiet. I've spent 3 years mourning Edward, and I nearly missed you standing right in front of me." He raised her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity racing up her arm. "Be my light, Charlotte. Fill Thornton House with whatever truth you choose to create. Just don't let me go back to the silence." The music below them swelled, the famous Tristan chord hanging in the air, yearning for resolution. Charlotte looked at the man, offering her not just a title, but recognition, partnership, truth. She thought of the years of being told to be smaller, quieter, less. Then she let it all go. "I won't," she promised, her voice clear and steady, cutting through the darkness. "I will never let you go back to silence." She turned her hand in his grasp, lacing their fingers together properly. Below them, the tenor began singing of eternal love, but Charlotte barely heard. She was listening to Alfred's breathing, to the new, terrifying, wonderful melody of her own heart, learning to beat without fear. He didn't kiss her mouth, not here, where 1,000 eyes might see. Instead, he leaned his forehead against hers, a gesture more intimate than any kiss. They sat like that, framed by velvet and shadow, two solitary souls finally finding harmony while the music soared around them, loud and glorious and true. If you're finding yourself drawn into Charlotte and Alfred's story, I'd love to have you join our channel family. Subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. And here's something I'm genuinely curious about. If you could sketch one emotion the way Charlotte does, what would it be? Drop your answer in the comments. I read every single one, and your insights always surprise me. The morning after the opera arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made everything feel sharper, more real. Charlotte stood at her bedroom window, watching carriages roll past on the street below, and felt the weight of her decision settling into her bones. She had chosen Alfred publicly, in front of half of London society. There would be consequences. The breakfast room was thick with tension when she descended. Victoria sat alone, picking at toast she wasn't eating, her face drawn and pale. Their mother had already retired to her sitting room with a headache. Strategic or genuine, Charlotte couldn't say. "He'll call today," Victoria said without preamble, not looking up. "The Duke, to make it official." Charlotte poured herself tea with steady hands. "Yes, I expect he will. Do you love him?" Victoria's voice was small, stripped of its usual performance. Charlotte considered the question seriously. I don't know yet, but I understand him, and he understands me. That feels more valuable than the kind of love that's all performance and no foundation. Victoria finally looked at her, and her eyes were red-rimmed. I've been terrible to you. Yes, Charlotte agreed quietly. You have. I was so afraid, Victoria's voice cracked, of being nothing, of disappearing. Every year I get older, every season I watch younger girls make brilliant matches, and I'm still here, still unmarried, still desperate. Charlotte set down her teacup and moved to sit beside her sister. You made yourself nothing by trying to be everything to everyone. You performed so hard, you forgot who you actually are underneath it all. Victoria laughed bitterly. I'm not sure there is anything underneath anymore. Then perhaps it's time to find out. Charlotte took her sister's hand. I'm not your enemy, Victoria. I never was. We just wanted different things, and you couldn't see that there was room for both of us. There wasn't room, Victoria whispered. Not in their world. Not when we're already on the margins of society, 2 daughters with a modest dowry and no father to advocate for us. Then perhaps their world is too small, Charlotte said firmly. A footman appeared in the doorway. Miss Ashworth, the Duke of Thornton is here to see you. Victoria squeezed Charlotte's hand once, then released it. Go. Don't keep him waiting. Charlotte found Alfred in the drawing room, standing by the window with his hands clasped behind his back. He looked as though he'd barely slept. There were shadows under his eyes, and his usual impeccable appearance had a slightly rumpled quality that made him seem more human, more accessible. He turned when she entered, and the relief that flooded his face was so profound it made her breath catch. Charlotte. Her name on his lips sounded like a prayer. Your Grace. Alfred, he corrected. When we're alone, please, I need to hear you say it. Alfred, she repeated, testing the intimacy of his Christian name. It felt dangerous and right. He crossed the room in 3 long strides, stopping just short of touching her. I barely slept. I kept thinking you might change your mind, that in the cold light of day you'd realize that I'd chosen poorly. She smiled. I didn't sleep much either, but not from doubt. His shoulders visibly relaxed. I need to do this properly. He reached into his coat and withdrew a small velvet box. I should have asked your mother's permission first, but I find I need to know your answer before I involve anyone else. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, not an ostentatious diamond, but a deep blue sapphire surrounded by small pearls. It looked old, precious, personal. This was my mother's, Alfred said quietly. She died when Edward and I were young. My father gave it to me before he passed, told me to give it to someone who could see past the title to the man underneath. He dropped to one knee and Charlotte's heart stuttered. Charlotte Ashworth, you terrify me, he said, looking up at her with absolute honesty. You see things I've tried to hide. You draw the truth even when it's painful. You refuse to perform or pretend. And I find that I cannot imagine my life without that honesty anymore. His voice roughened. Marry me. Not because of the title or the houses, or any of the things society values. Marry me because we understand each other's silence. Because you showed me that grief doesn't have to be the end of feeling. Because when I'm with you, I remember what it's like to be alive. Charlotte felt tears sliding down her cheeks. Yes, she whispered. Yes, Alfred. I'll marry you. He stood in a rush, sliding the ring onto her finger with shaking hands. Then, finally, he kissed her. It was nothing like the chaste kisses society permitted. It was desperate and deep, his hands cupping her face like she was something precious and breakable. She gripped his lapels and kissed him back with 3 years of loneliness and longing, with every sketch she'd drawn of emptiness, pouring all of it into this moment of connection. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Alfred pressed his forehead to hers. I'm not an easy man, Charlotte. I'm difficult and solitary, and I have ghosts. I'm not easy either, she countered. I'm melancholic and strange, and I see too much. Perfect, he murmured, and kissed her again. The formal announcement in the Times 3 days later caused exactly the scandal Charlotte had anticipated. The betting books at the gentlemen's clubs had apparently given odds of 50-1 against the Iron Duke marrying anyone, let alone the younger, overlooked Ashworth daughter. Lady Pemberton stopped speaking to Mrs. Ashworth entirely. Lady Weatherby sent a stiff congratulations that dripped with condescension. Half of society whispered that the Duke must be mad, while the other half whispered that Charlotte must have trapped him somehow. Charlotte found she didn't care. She was too busy being fitted for her wedding dress, too busy sketching the gardens at Thornton House that would soon be her home, too busy learning what it felt like to be truly seen by another person. Alfred called every day. Sometimes they sat in her mother's drawing room with a chaperone, maintaining propriety. Other times they walked in the park, and he told her about Edward. Really told her, not the sanitized version he showed the world. He was reckless, Alfred said one afternoon as they strolled through Hyde Park, her hand tucked into his elbow. He bet on everything, rode too fast, laughed too loud. After he died, I tried to be serious enough for both of us, to make up for his wildness by being completely controlled. You buried yourself along with him, Charlotte observed. Yes. Alfred stopped walking, turning to face her. Until you drew that sketch. Until you showed me that acknowledging loss doesn't mean drowning in it. She reached up to touch his face gently. He wouldn't want you to stop living. No, Alfred agreed, catching her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. He'd probably call me a bloody fool for waiting this long to feel anything again. Charlotte laughed, the sound bright and unexpected even to herself. Alfred stared at her. Do that again. What? Laugh? I've never heard you laugh before. She realized he was right. She'd spent so long being the serious one, the dark one, that genuine joy had become foreign. Then I'll have to practice, she said. We both will. His smile was small, but real. Yes, we will. They walked on, and for the first time in 3 years, for both of them, the future felt like something other than an endurance trial. It felt like possibility. The wedding was set for early December, a small ceremony in the private chapel at Thornton House. Charlotte had expected Alfred to want something grand. A duke's wedding should be an event, a spectacle. But he'd been adamant. I don't want to perform for them, he'd said firmly. This is ours, let them gossip all they want. So it would be intimate, immediate family only, a handful of close friends. Maestro Moretti had agreed to play the organ, which felt like a benediction. But first, there were the traditional pre-wedding obligations, one of which was the formal dinner at Thornton House, where Charlotte would meet Alfred's extended family, his cousins, his late mother's sisters, the various relations who emerged from the woodwork when a duke was getting married. Charlotte dressed with care in a gown of deep plum silk that Victoria had helped her choose. Her sister had been different since that morning conversation, quieter, more genuine. She'd even offered to help with the wedding preparations without any apparent ulterior motive. You look beautiful, Victoria said, fastening a pearl necklace around Charlotte's throat. Truly, not performance beautiful, real beautiful. Charlotte met her sister's eyes in the mirror. Thank you for helping me. I'm trying, Victoria said softly, to be a better sister, to be real, as you said. It's harder than performing ever was. Most worthwhile things are. The dinner at Thornton House was exactly the ordeal Charlotte had anticipated. The dining room was enormous, the table laden with silver and crystal, and the assembled relatives ranged from genuinely warm to coldly assessing. Alfred's Aunt Beatrice, a formidable woman in her 60s, studied Charlotte like a general surveying a battlefield. So you're the artist, she said, making it sound vaguely scandalous. I sketch, yes, Lady Beatrice, Charlotte replied evenly. How bohemian. The word dripped with disapproval. I do hope you understand the responsibilities of being a duchess. There's no time for hobbies when one is managing a household of this size. Alfred's hand found Charlotte's under the table, squeezing gently. A silent message. I'm here. I believe, Charlotte said carefully, that art isn't a hobby but a way of seeing the world. And understanding how people think and feel seems rather important for someone who'll be hosting political dinners and managing tenants. Aunt Beatrice's eyebrows rose. Several cousins exchanged glances. Well, the older woman said finally, you have a spine at least. That's something. Alfred's cousin James, a cheerful young man training for the clergy, leaned forward with genuine interest. I'd love to see your work sometime, Miss Ashworth. Alfred says you have quite a unique perspective. Alfred talks about my work. Charlotte glanced at her fiancé in surprise. Constantly, James said with a grin. It's rather nauseating, actually. Alfred never talks about anything except estate management and parliamentary votes. Now it's all Charlotte noticed this and Charlotte drew that. We're all quite curious to meet the woman who cracked the ice duke. Alfred's ears went slightly red. James, for the love of... It's true. Another cousin, Eleanor, chimed in. You're practically human now, Alfred. It's unsettling. Despite herself, Charlotte laughed. The sound seemed to ease the tension around the table. Even Aunt Beatrice's expression softened slightly. After dinner, Alfred drew Charlotte away from the drawing room where the ladies were gathering, pulling her into the library, Edward's library, which had become their private sanctuary. I'm sorry about Aunt Beatrice, he said immediately. She means well, but she's formidable, Charlotte supplied. Protective of you, I understand. They're your family. They want to be sure I'm worthy. You're more than worthy. Alfred pulled her close, his arms wrapping around her waist. You're extraordinary, and they'll see that given time. Charlotte rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady thump of his heart. Are you sure about this? About me? It's not too late to... Don't. His arms tightened. Don't doubt this. I've never been more certain of anything. He pulled back just enough to look at her, his grey eyes intense in the firelight. Charlotte, I was half alive before you, going through motions, fulfilling duties, but not actually living. You changed that. You changed it yourself, she corrected gently. I just showed you it was possible. Then we changed each other. He cupped her face in his hands. That's what marriage should be, isn't it? Two people making each other more than they were separately. Yes, she whispered. He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Charlotte felt heat bloom through her entire body. Each kiss was different, she was learning. Some were gentle, some desperate, some, like this one, full of promise for what their wedding night would bring. Alfred groaned softly, his hands sliding from her face to her waist, pulling her impossibly closer. 3 more weeks, he muttered against her mouth. 3 weeks until you're my wife. It feels like forever, Charlotte admitted, surprising herself with her boldness. His eyes darkened. You're making this very difficult, love. Good, she said, and kissed him again. A week before the wedding, Charlotte received an unexpected visitor. She was in the morning room, sketching designs for new gardens at Thornton House, when the butler announced Lady Victoria Ashworth. But it wasn't her sister, Victoria. It was Alfred's late mother. No, Charlotte's mind corrected itself as an elegant woman in her 50s entered. This was Alfred's Aunt Margaret, his mother's youngest sister, who'd been travelling on the continent and had just returned. Miss Ashworth, the woman said warmly, extending both hands. I'm so sorry I missed the dinner last week. I came as quickly as I could when I received Alfred's letter. Charlotte stood, setting aside her sketches. Lady Margaret. It's a pleasure to meet you. Oh, none of that. Call me Margaret, please. She settled into a chair, studying Charlotte with kind eyes. I wanted to meet you properly, without the entire family watching like hawks. Alfred wrote that you're an artist? I sketch, Charlotte said, the familiar uncertainty creeping in. Though I'm not sure that qualifies as... May I see? Charlotte hesitated, then handed over her current work, designs for a memorial garden for Edward, incorporating elements Alfred had mentioned his brother loved. Margaret studied the sketches in silence, and Charlotte saw tears gather in her eyes. This is for Edward, Margaret said softly. Yes. Alfred mentioned he loved bright colours, chaos, life. I thought, a wild garden, not controlled and formal, but something that grows freely. With trumpet vines because he played trumpet. Margaret looked up, tears now flowing freely. My dear girl, this is perfect. This is exactly what Edward would have wanted. She set the sketches down carefully and took Charlotte's hands. Alfred has been lost since Edward died. I watched him lock himself away, become this cold, dutiful thing that wasn't really my nephew at all. And then he wrote to me about you, and I could hear him in the letter. The real Alfred. the one who feels deeply but never shows it. He's teaching me to be brave, Charlotte confessed, to stop hiding. And you're teaching him to feel again, Margaret said. That's what love should do. Unlock the parts of us we've kept locked away. She squeezed Charlotte's hands. Welcome to the family, Charlotte, the real family. Not the posturing relatives who care about titles and appearances, but those of us who loved the people Alfred and Edward were, not what society expected them to be. Charlotte felt something in her chest loosen. Acceptance, not conditional, not grudging, but genuine. Thank you, she whispered. Now, Margaret said briskly, wiping her eyes, show me everything you've been working on. I want to know all about this woman who performed the miracle of making my nephew human again. They spent the afternoon together, and by the time Margaret left, Charlotte felt she'd gained not just an aunt by marriage, but a true friend. The wedding was coming. Her new life was coming. And for the first time, Charlotte wasn't afraid of being seen. She was ready to step fully into the light. The morning of the wedding dawned cold and clear, frost etching delicate patterns on the windows of Charlotte's bedroom. She woke early, her heart racing with a mixture of anticipation and nerves that made her feel simultaneously exhilarated and terrified. Victoria came to help her dress, along with Margaret, who had insisted on being part of the preparations. The gown was simple but elegant, ivory silk with delicate embroidery at the sleeves and neckline, designed to allow movement rather than restrict it. Charlotte had refused the typical elaborate confection of lace and ribbons. "You look like yourself," Victoria said softly, fastening the buttons down Charlotte's back. "Just more." "That's exactly right," Margaret agreed, arranging Charlotte's hair in a loose style that framed her face. Not costumed, not performing, just Charlotte on the most important day of her life. Mrs. Ashworth dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. "My darling girl, a duchess. I never imagined—" "Neither did I, Mother," Charlotte said honestly. She turned to look at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was familiar but transformed, not by the dress or the occasion, but by the light in her eyes, the certainty. She was choosing this, choosing Alfred, choosing a life of truth over a life of hiding. "Are you frightened?" Victoria asked quietly. Charlotte considered the question. "Terrified," she admitted, "but not of Alfred, of failing him somehow, of not being enough." "You're more than enough," Margaret said firmly. "And Alfred knows it. That boy has been waiting his entire life for someone who could see past the armor to the man underneath. You did that, Charlotte. You saw him." The chapel at Thornton House was small and intimate, lit by candles that cast warm golden light over the gathered guests. No more than 30 people, family and a few close friends. Maestro Moretti sat at the organ, his weathered hands coaxing gentle music from the keys. Charlotte stood at the back of the chapel, her hand resting on Victoria's arm. Her sister would walk her down the aisle, a choice that had surprised everyone, but felt right. "Ready?" Victoria whispered. "Yes," Charlotte breathed. The music shifted, and they began to walk. Alfred stood at the altar, and the moment Charlotte saw him, everything else fell away. He wore formal black, but his face was what captured her. Open, vulnerable, his eyes fixed on her with such intensity, she felt it like a physical touch. She'd spent her whole life feeling invisible, but Alfred saw her, truly saw her. When Victoria placed Charlotte's hand in Alfred's, he gripped it like a lifeline. His fingers were trembling slightly. "You're shaking," Charlotte whispered. "So are you," he murmured back, a small smile touching his lips. The vicar began the ceremony, but Charlotte barely heard the words. She was too focused on Alfred's face, on the way he was looking at her like she was the only person in the world who mattered. When it came time for vows, Alfred spoke clearly, his voice carrying through the small chapel. "I, Alfred, take you, Charlotte, to be my wife, to honor your truth, to shelter your heart, to see you always, not as the world sees you, but as you truly are. I vow to fill our home with light and let you fill it with honest beauty. I promise to never ask you to be less than you are." Charlotte's throat tightened with emotion. Her own vows came out steady despite her tears. I, Charlotte, take you, Alfred, to be my husband, to honor your grief, to celebrate your joy, to see you always, not as the world demands you be, but as you truly are. I vow to help you remember how to feel. I promise to never let you return to silence." Alfred's eyes were suspiciously bright. "By the power vested in me," the vicar intoned, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. Your Grace, you may kiss your bride." Alfred cupped Charlotte's face in both hands, his touch infinitely gentle. "My Duchess," he whispered, and kissed her. It was soft at first, reverent, but deepened as Charlotte's hands came up to grip his coat. The small gathering applauded, but neither of them noticed. When they finally broke apart, Alfred rested his forehead against hers. "Mine," he breathed. "Ours," Charlotte corrected. The wedding breakfast was held in Thornton House's smaller dining room, warm and convivial. Champagne flowed, toasts were made, and Charlotte found herself laughing more than she ever had in her life. Cousin James stood to offer a toast, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "To Alfred and Charlotte, who proved that even the Iron Duke has a heart. Though we're all still adjusting to seeing him smile, it's unsettling, really." "Hear, hear," several voices chorused. Alfred rolled his eyes, but squeezed Charlotte's hand under the table. Aunt Beatrice, who had softened considerably, raised her glass. "To the new Duchess of Thornton, may she continue to keep my nephew honest and human." Margaret stood last, her voice thick with emotion. "To Charlotte and Alfred, two souls who found each other in the darkness and chose to build something bright. May your home always be filled with truth, with art, with love, and with the kind of honest joy that Edward would have celebrated." Alfred's jaw clenched with emotion. Charlotte squeezed his hand back. As the afternoon faded into evening, guests began to depart. Victoria embraced Charlotte tightly before leaving. "Be happy," she whispered. "You deserve this." "So do you," Charlotte said. "Your happiness will come too, Victoria, when you stop performing and start living." Victoria nodded, tears in her eyes, and left with Mrs. Ashworth. Finally, the house was quiet. The servants had been dismissed to their quarters. Alfred and Charlotte stood in the grand entrance hall, suddenly alone, suddenly married, suddenly facing their wedding night. "Would you like to see your rooms?" Alfred asked, his voice careful. "Our rooms, I mean. I had them redecorated." "If you don't like it, we can change—" Charlotte silenced him with a kiss. "Show me," she said simply. He led her up the grand staircase to the ducal apartments. The Duchess's chambers were beautiful, pale blue walls, comfortable furniture, excellent light for drawing. But what caught Charlotte's attention was the connecting door to Alfred's rooms, standing open. "I thought," Alfred began, suddenly uncertain. "We don't have to. I mean, many couples maintain separate bedrooms. If you'd prefer privacy." "Alfred," Charlotte turned to face him, her heart pounding but her voice steady. "I didn't marry you to maintain separate bedrooms. I married you to build a life with you, all of it." Something fierce and hungry flashed in his eyes. "Charlotte, I'm nervous," she admitted, "but I'm not afraid. Not of you. Never of you." He closed the distance between them in 2 strides, framing her face with his hands. "I'll be gentle," he promised roughly. "I'll take care of you." "I know," she whispered. "I trust you." That trust, freely given, seemed to undo him. He kissed her deeply, walking her slowly backward toward his bedroom, their bedroom now. The door closed softly behind them. Outside, frost continued to pattern the windows. Inside, 2 people who had spent years in cold silence finally found warmth in each other's arms. The night stretched before them, full of whispered promises and gentle discoveries, of learning what it meant to be truly seen, truly known, truly loved. And when Charlotte finally fell asleep in Alfred's arms hours later, exhausted and content, she dreamed not of shadows but of light. The winter morning crept through heavy curtains, painting silver streaks across the bedroom floor. Charlotte woke slowly, luxuriously, aware first of warmth, then of the unfamiliar weight of an arm draped across her waist. Alfred, her husband. The reality of it settled over her like a benediction. She turned carefully in his embrace, studying his face in sleep. The harsh lines that marked his waking hours had softened. He looked younger, more vulnerable, the Iron Duke stripped away to reveal just the man. His eyes opened, grey and immediately alert, and a slow smile transformed his face. "Good morning, wife." "Good morning, husband," she whispered back, still marveling at the words. He pulled her closer, nuzzling into her hair. "How are you feeling?" She considered the question honestly. There was tenderness in places she'd never been aware of before, a pleasant ache that reminded her of the intimacy they'd shared. But more than that, there was a profound sense of rightness. "Complete," she said finally. "As if I've been a half-finished sketch my whole life, and last night someone drew the final lines." Alfred's arms tightened around her. "That's exactly it. You've articulated what I couldn't find words for." They lay in comfortable silence for a long moment, listening to the house wake around them. Distant sounds of servants beginning their morning routines, the clatter of coal being delivered, the muffled rhythm of a household preparing for the day. "We should probably get up," Charlotte said without making any move to do so. "Probably," Alfred agreed, not releasing her. "But we're the Duke and Duchess of Thornton. We can stay in bed as long as we damn well please." Charlotte laughed, delighted by this glimpse of playfulness. "What will the servants think?" "That we're newlyweds," he said, pressing a kiss to her forehead, "which is exactly what we are. Let them think whatever they like." Eventually, necessity and hunger drove them from the warm cocoon of blankets. Charlotte's lady's maid, a kind woman named Mary, whom Alfred had hired specifically for her discretion and competence, helped her dress in a comfortable morning gown of soft green wool. "You look radiant, Your Grace," Mary said with genuine warmth. Charlotte caught her reflection in the mirror. She did look different, not transformed in any dramatic way, but illuminated from within. Loved. Breakfast was served in the smaller dining room, just the two of them. Alfred had dismissed the footman, wanting privacy. He poured her tea himself, remembered that she took it with honey, passed her the toast before she had to ask. "I've been thinking," he said, buttering his own toast with deliberate casualness that told her this mattered to him. "About Edward's memorial garden. Your designs are perfect, but I'd like you to oversee the implementation. Make it yours. Ours." "Truly?" Charlotte felt warmth bloom in her chest. "You trust me with that?" "I trust you with everything," he said simply. "Besides, you knew what he would have wanted better than I did somehow. You saw it clearly." "I only drew what you told me about him," she protested. "No." Alfred set down his knife. Fixing her with that intense gaze she was learning meant he was about to say something important. "You listened to what I said and heard what I couldn't say. You saw past my words to my grief and translated it into something beautiful. That's your gift, Charlotte. Not just drawing what's visible, but revealing what's hidden." Charlotte felt tears prick her eyes. "You see me so clearly." "Because you let me," he said. "Because you're brave enough to be seen." After breakfast, Alfred took her on a proper tour of Thornton House, not the formal rooms she'd seen before, but the private spaces that would be her home now. The library where they could work side by side, him with his correspondence and her with her sketches. The conservatory where winter couldn't touch them, the attics full of 3 generations of accumulated memories. In one of the upper rooms, Charlotte found trunks of Edward's belongings that Alfred hadn't been able to sort through. "We could do it together," she suggested gently. "If you're ready." Alfred looked at the trunks for a long moment, then nodded. "Yes, I think I'm ready now." They spent the afternoon sorting through Edward's things, his terrible watercolors, which made them both laugh. His trumpet, tarnished but still beautiful, letters and trinkets, and all the small artifacts that proved a life had been lived. "He would have liked you," Alfred said, holding one of Edward's sketchbooks, full of enthusiastic but artistically questionable drawings. "He would have badgered you to teach him to draw properly, then gotten frustrated after 5 minutes and suggested going riding instead." "I wish I could have known him," Charlotte said honestly. "You do know him," Alfred said, surprising her. "Through me. The best parts of me are what he left behind. The parts that can still laugh, still feel, still hope. Those are Edward's gifts. You just helped me remember how to access them." He set down the sketchbook and pulled Charlotte into his arms. "Thank you," he said into her hair. for giving me back my brother. Not literally, but you gave me permission to remember him with joy instead of just grief." That evening, they dressed for dinner, their first formal meal as Duke and Duchess in residence. Charlotte wore deep sapphire blue that matched her engagement ring. Alfred couldn't stop looking at her. "You're staring," she said, though she was smiling. "I'm allowed to stare at my own wife," he countered. "It's in the marriage vows." "I checked." She laughed, and he caught the sound with a kiss. Dinner was excellent, but neither of them paid much attention to the food. They were too busy talking, really talking, about Alfred's responsibilities in Parliament, about Charlotte's ideas for patronizing young artists, about their plans for the Memorial Garden, about everything and nothing. "I received a letter from Maestro Moretti today," Charlotte mentioned. "He's organizing a charity concert for the new music conservatory. He asked if I might contribute some sketches for the program." "Of course you should," Alfred said immediately. "Your work deserves to be seen, Charlotte. I know you've hidden it away for years, but—" "I want to show it now," she interrupted. "I want to be brave the way you said, to speak my truth even when it's uncomfortable." Pride shone in Alfred's eyes. "Then do it, and I'll stand beside you, no matter what anyone says, even if they call your wife peculiar and morbid." "Especially then," he said firmly, "because you're not peculiar, you're perceptive, and you're not morbid, you're honest. Anyone who can't see the difference isn't worth our time." After dinner, they retired to the library. Alfred had correspondence to review, and Charlotte wanted to work on the concert sketches. But they did it side by side, in comfortable silence punctuated by occasional comments or shared observations. This, Charlotte realized, was what she'd been seeking her whole life. Not constant conversation or performance, but companionable silence with someone who understood that quiet didn't mean absent. "What are you thinking?" Alfred asked, looking up from his papers to find her watching him. "That I'm happy," she said simply. "Genuinely, deeply happy. I didn't know I could feel this way." He set aside his work and drew her into his lap, holding her close. "Neither did I," he admitted. "I thought happiness was something that had died with Edward, that the best I could hope for was dutiful contentment. And now I know that grief and joy can coexist," he said. "That loving someone new doesn't diminish the love you had for someone lost. You taught me that, Charlotte." She kissed him softly. "We taught each other." Later in their bedroom, Alfred made love to her with the tenderness of someone cherishing something precious, and Charlotte gave herself to him without reservation, without fear. And afterward, wrapped in his arms with moonlight painting patterns on the ceiling, Charlotte realized that she had finally found what she'd been drawing all those years in her sketches. Not the absence, not the shadow, but the light that remained, the love that endured, the wholeness that came from being truly, completely seen. Spring arrived at Thornton House with an explosion of color that would have made Edward proud. The Memorial Garden was nearly complete, and Charlotte spent her mornings there, overseeing the final plantings while sketching the progress in her leather-bound journal. 3 months of marriage had settled into a rhythm that felt both exciting and comfortable. Alfred had returned to his duties in Parliament, but he came home each evening eager to hear about Charlotte's day, to see her latest work, to simply be with her. She was working on a sketch of the trumpet vines when she felt the familiar wave of nausea that had been plaguing her for the past week. She set down her charcoal and pressed a hand to her stomach, breathing slowly through her nose. "Your Grace." Mary appeared at her elbow, concern evident. "Are you unwell?" "Just a passing spell," Charlotte said, though she knew better. She'd suspected for 2 weeks now, and this morning's sickness had all but confirmed it. She was carrying Alfred's child. The knowledge filled her with a mixture of joy and terror. She wanted to tell him immediately, wanted to see his face when he learned he would be a father. But she also wanted to be certain, wanted to have the doctor's confirmation before she spoke. "Mary," she said quietly, "would you send for Dr. Henderson? Discreetly, please." The maid's face broke into a knowing smile. "Of course, Your Grace." Dr. Henderson confirmed what Charlotte already knew. She was approximately 6 weeks along, healthy, and could expect the baby to arrive in late November or early December. "Congratulations, Your Grace," the elderly physician said warmly. "His Grace will be delighted." Charlotte hoped so. They'd never discussed children explicitly, though Alfred had mentioned once that Thornton House felt too empty for its size. But a baby so soon? Would he feel trapped, obligated? She dismissed the fears as soon as they formed. This was Alfred, the man who had chosen her specifically because she was honest, because she didn't perform. He would want the truth, always. She found him in Edward's old library, which had become their shared workspace. He was frowning over estate accounts, his reading glasses perched on his nose in a way that made him look endearingly scholarly. "Alfred," she said softly. He looked up immediately, his expression transforming when he saw her. "There's my Duchess. I was just thinking about you." "Were you?" She moved into the room, suddenly nervous in a way she hadn't been since their wedding night. "Always." He set aside his papers, giving her his full attention. Then his eyes sharpened. "What's wrong? You look pale." "I'm fine," she said quickly. "Better than fine, actually. I have something to tell you." Alfred stood, crossing to her in 3 long strides. He took her hands, his face etched with concern. "Charlotte, whatever it is, just say it. You're frightening me." "I'm pregnant," she blurted out. 6 weeks, Dr. Henderson says. The baby should arrive in late autumn or early winter." Alfred went absolutely still. For a terrible moment, Charlotte thought she'd made a mistake, that it was too soon, Then his face split into the widest smile she'd ever seen from him. "Pregnant?" His voice was choked with emotion. "We're having a baby." "Yes," she whispered, relief flooding through her. Is this—" He kissed her deeply, desperately, his hands cradling her face like she was made of spun glass. When he pulled back, there were tears streaming down his cheeks. "I'm going to be a father," he said wonderingly. "We're going to have a child." He dropped to his knees suddenly, pressing his forehead against her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one. I'm your father, and I promise you, I promise, I will love you fiercely. I will teach you to feel, to be brave, to be honest, just like your mother taught me." Charlotte ran her fingers through his hair, her own tears falling freely now. "Alfred, thank you," he said roughly, looking up at her. "Thank you for this, for choosing me, for making me remember what it means to live, for giving me a future I didn't think I deserved." "You deserve everything," she said fiercely. "You deserve joy and love and a house full of life. We both do." He stood, pulling her into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear. "I was so dead inside before you, Charlotte. And now I'm going to be a father. Now we're building a family. Now there's going to be laughter and chaos and tiny fingerprints on all my important documents." She laughed through her tears. "Are you ready for that?" "No," he admitted. "I'm terrified, but I'm also more excited than I've ever been about anything." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "Except marrying you, that's still the best thing I've ever done." The months that followed were a blur of preparation and growing wonder. Charlotte's body changed, rounding gradually, and Alfred treated her like she was the most precious thing in the world. He read medical texts about pregnancy and childbirth until she had to confiscate them because they were making him anxious. "The book says you should avoid excitement," he announced one evening at dinner. Charlotte set down her fork. "Alfred, I'm pregnant, not dying. I can still walk, still sketch, still live my life. But what if—" "No." She reached across the table to take his hand. "We're not doing this. We're not spending the next 6 months afraid. That's not who we are." He squeezed her fingers. "You're right. I'm sorry. I love you so much. Both of you. The thought of anything going wrong—" "Then we'll face it together," she said firmly. "But we won't borrow trouble. We'll choose joy, Alfred. That's what we promised each other." The memorial garden was completed in May, and they held a small dedication ceremony. Margaret came, and Victoria, and many of the family members who had attended their wedding. Maestro Moretti played trumpet, badly, deliberately in Edward's honor, and everyone laughed. Alfred stood with his arm around Charlotte's expanding waist and looked at the wild, colorful garden she'd created. "He would have loved this," he said quietly. "He would have loved you." "I wish he could have met his niece or nephew," Charlotte said. "He knows," Alfred said with certainty. Somehow, he knows. And he's laughing at me for being so terrified of fatherhood. In July, Charlotte held her first public exhibition of sketches at the conservatory's charity gala. She'd been terrified that people would mock her work, that they'd find it too dark, too honest, too much. Instead, they were moved. People stood in front of her drawings in silence, many wiping away tears. The sketches of absence and loss, of empty chairs and waiting windows, spoke to something universal in human experience. "You've done something remarkable," Maestro Moretti told her. "You've made grief beautiful without diminishing its weight. That's a rare gift." Alfred stood beside her the entire evening, his pride evident in every glance, every protective touch. When someone made a disparaging comment about her morbid sensibilities, he stepped forward immediately. "My wife creates honest art," he said coldly. "If you're too shallow to appreciate truth, that speaks to your limitations, not hers." The person retreated quickly, and Charlotte bit back a smile. "My fierce Duke." "Always," he murmured, kissing her temple. Charlotte went into labor on the first day of December, exactly 1 year after their wedding. The pain was intense, terrifying, but Alfred stayed with her through all of it, despite convention dictating he should wait elsewhere. "I'm not leaving you," he said firmly when the midwife tried to usher him out. "We do everything together." That was the promise. 17 hours later, their daughter was born, small, perfect, with a powerful set of lungs that she used immediately. "A girl," the midwife announced, placing the squalling bundle on Charlotte's chest, "healthy and strong." Charlotte stared at the tiny, red-faced creature in wonder. "Alfred, look! Look at her!" Alfred was crying openly, unashamedly. He touched his daughter's tiny hand with one finger, and she immediately gripped it with surprising strength. "Hello, little one," he whispered. "I'm your father. And this is your extraordinary mother who just proved she's the bravest person I know." "What should we name her?" Charlotte asked, exhausted but glowing. Alfred looked at his wife and daughter, this family they'd created against all odds. "Eleanor," he said, "for new beginnings, and Margaret for the aunt who taught us about acceptance." Eleanor Margaret Thornton. Charlotte tested the name. "It's perfect." Their daughter stopped crying as if she approved, her tiny eyes struggling to focus on her parents' faces. "She has your eyes," Alfred said wonderingly. "And your stubborn chin," Charlotte countered. They sat together, husband, wife, and child, as winter light crept through the windows. Downstairs they could hear Victoria arriving with Mrs. Ashworth, Margaret not far behind. The house that had been so silent for so long was filling with life, with family, with the sound of love made visible. 2 years later, Charlotte stood in Edward's memorial garden with Eleanor toddling at her feet. Their daughter was investigating a butterfly with intense concentration, her chubby hands reaching for something she couldn't quite catch. "Mama, fly," Eleanor announced with the absolute certainty of a 2-year-old. "Yes, darling." A butterfly. Alfred emerged from the house carrying their infant son, Arthur, named for the brother who would never meet him, but whose memory lived on in the wild garden and in the laughter that now filled Thornton House. "How are my girls?" Alfred asked, kissing Charlotte before settling on the bench beside her. "Your daughter is trying to capture butterflies," Charlotte said. "Your son is sleeping through anything as usual." They sat in comfortable silence, watching Eleanor chase color and light through the garden. The memorial they'd created for loss had become a celebration of life, exactly as it should be. "Happy?" Alfred asked, though he already knew the answer. "Impossibly so," Charlotte replied. "Sometimes I think about that girl at the party, the one who wanted to disappear into the wallpaper, the one who thought she was too much and not enough all at once. And I'm grateful she found the courage to be seen, to be honest, to choose love even when it was terrifying." Alfred shifted baby Arthur to one arm so he could hold Charlotte's hand with the other. "I'm grateful she chose me." "We chose each other," Charlotte corrected, squeezing his fingers. Eleanor ran over, her hands full of petals she'd collected. "Pretty, Mama, for you." Charlotte accepted the gift with the seriousness it deserved. "Thank you, my darling. They're beautiful." "Like Mama," Eleanor announced, then toddled off to find more treasures. Alfred laughed. "She's not wrong." Charlotte leaned her head on his shoulder, watching their children, their garden, their life unfolding in the spring sunshine. They had built something beautiful from grief. They had chosen truth over performance, connection over isolation, love over fear, and every day they chose it again. That was the secret, Charlotte had learned. Love wasn't a single moment of choice. It was choosing each other over and over in 1,000 small moments that added up to a life. "I love you," she said simply. "I love you," Alfred replied. "Both of you, all of you. This whole beautiful, chaotic life we've created." Baby Arthur stirred in his arms, letting out a small cry. Eleanor came running at the sound, wanting to help comfort her brother. The four of them sat together in the garden Edward would never see, but would absolutely have loved. A family forged from honesty, strengthened by grief, and celebrating with joy. The Iron Duke had learned to feel. The Invisible Girl had learned to be seen. And together, they had built something neither could have created alone. A home filled not with performance or pretense, but with truth, with art, with laughter, and with love that grew wilder and more beautiful with each passing season. In the end, Charlotte learned that being too much was never the problem. The world had simply been too small. She had needed someone brave enough to meet her in the depths, to acknowledge that real love doesn't flourish in shallow soil. Alfred showed her that being seen isn't something to fear, but something to cultivate. And she showed him that grief honored is grief transformed, that the spaces we carve for those we've lost become sanctuaries for new love to grow. Perhaps the truest measure of love is this. Does it ask you to shrink, or does it give you room to expand? Does it demand performance, or does it celebrate authenticity? Does it fear your depths, or does it dive in beside you? If this story touched you, I'd be honored if you'd leave a like. It helps others find these stories of courage and transformation. Please subscribe to join our community of hearts seeking authentic love. And I'm genuinely curious, where in the world are you listening from? Drop your location in the comments. I love knowing this story is reaching souls across the globe. Thank you for spending this time with Charlotte and Alfred. Until the next story, choose truth over pretense, always.